Welcome, everybody. Thank you to coming to Space Cowboy Books Online for the first in this season's Flash Science Fiction Nights. We had a great time last year doing this, really excited to get the series going again. This night, I'm going to be sharing a story with you, and we're also going to have SC Attwell and Andy Dibble. So we have a wonderful variety of science fiction stories for you tonight. I'm going to open up the show with a short piece of mine that was just published in this year's Copper Mountain College's How Volume 25 journal. I am the owner of Space Cowboy Books. I'm also the producer and editor of Simultaneous Times podcast, which all of our readers tonight have been featured on. And I'm also the author of the novella Garbage In, Gospel Out, which I will put a link to the chat in. I am going to be reading a very brief piece for you tonight that is entitled An Off-the-Record Letter to the People Watching Back Home. Everybody knows that it takes a long time to get anywhere traveling through space. Even at light speed, the trips are long. You see pictures of us spinning in circles, catching floating globes of water. You think that's all we do? Now you imagine us standing around consoles, turning knobs and watching blinking lights. Geez, you've seen too many movies. How many hours of the day do you think we spend on that kind of crap? Well, I can tell you. I've turned some knobs and flicked some switches in my time. But computers are better suited for this work. We're mostly here to prove it's possible, to see if we can really leave and eventually stay somewhere. We look for paradise in the ever-greatening darkness. Anyway, we still have lives and do regular stuff. In fact, most of our days are much like yours, with the exception that we probably put in more hours. The main difference is that there is no privacy, tight quarters at best. The endless noise of the machine covers up others' voices if you let it. But we are almost never outside of visual contact with each other. The TV is fond of saying that we eat together, that bonding at mealtime and close proximity is good for the psyche. That's the TV-friendly version anyway. We can leave for the stars, but we can't leave human needs behind. We bring all that stuff with us. What do you see in your mind's eye now? I'll bet all of a sudden you started thinking about spaceflight as boring. Obviously, you don't know us very well. Don't worry, it's not your fault. The propaganda, the radio dispatches they let you hear, and those dumb films of us eating water out of the sky, yeah, it all makes us look pretty apple pie. Do you really think that would work? It wouldn't. While our daily activities are much the same as yours, we can't go anywhere, and there is no privacy. I can see you shuddering now. For us, it's no problem. The solution was simple. Our crew, and they don't want you to know this, is polyamorous. We're all exhibitionists and voyeurs. The lack of privacy can be a real turn-on. And when we're done twiddling knobs for education videos, we're busy with a healthy and rigorous sex life. Don't feel like joining in? Go ahead and watch. Now you're seeing million-dollar money shots in your head. Calm down. Strict protocol for stuff like that. But we're active. Wouldn't you be if you had so much time to kill? None of the crew discriminates much. Keeps us from getting bored or developing resentments. They don't want you to know your tax dollars lead to so much fun. And all without American values. After all, we're about as far from America as you can get. Next up, we are going to have SZ Attwell, the author of Aestus, a wonderful space opera novel. SZ Attwell is a science writer and science fiction dystopian author. The first book in her series, Aestus, was a 2021 finalist for the Kindle Book Award, and she recently was made a member of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association. She lives in the Boston area, and I am going to hand it over to her to read her flash fiction piece for the night.
Hi, everyone. So this is something that I submitted a long time ago to Space Cowboy Books / Simultaneous Times. I hope you can't hear the really loud choir in the background. I apologize. All right, so here goes. So this is called attempted contact. The general sat down. He smoothed his garments. Time to announce to the humans their threatened demise. He turned on the system, stretched his webbed fingers. The communication had been carefully crafted. He'd gone over it with his closest officials, had it approved by the galactic courts. The humans were on a resource-rich planet and must be eliminated. Of course, honor and intergalactic conventions demanded that they acknowledge the declaration before he proceeded. He read the beautifully crafted wording again. Humans, this is in all caps. This is a message from the General of the Intergalactic Colonization Board. The planet you inhabit has attracted our attention. Do not resist. We offer you terms of surrender. He smiled widely and pressed disperse. He watched with glee as the email filtered through the human systems, the Pentagon, the KGB, various international intelligence agencies. He sat back, a smirk on his face. He'd done his research. He'd specifically used one of their odd little computer terminals, nearly useless technology, to make sure the message would be sent in a form the humans could not fail to comprehend, not like the Zorgans' foolish attempts at crop circles. He shook his head. Sometimes he wondered what those children were thinking. No, an electronic mail should not fail to get the attention of the major players on the strange little terminal pinged. This was probably it, the moment he'd been waiting for, he thought, suddenly shaking. The moment that he would gain authority to take over an entire planet, that jewel of blues and greens outside his spaceship, just ripe for the failed to deliver. He half choked on his alertness beverage. He opened the email. Your email has been classified as spam and rejected by the server. Then a second ping. His tracking system showed that the email had been opened by the FBI and had been marked as junk. The messages continued. He gaped. Spam? My threat of invasion and colonization by extragalactic forces is not spam? He turned around and slammed his webbed hands on the table. Get in here! Two of his hapless assistants half fell into the room. You, he said, voice very quiet, dangerous. You did not advise me that this could be considered as junk mail. No, sir, one of the flunkies said, trembling. We thought it an appropriate message, but sir, as the cultural consultant said, humans do not threaten war by email. They get out! Out! They fled. He put his face into one webbed hand. That's it.
Thank you. That was SC Attwell with Attempted Contact. Next up, we are going to have Andy Dibble, who is a Writers of the Future winner for volume 36. And you'll find a link to that in the chat in a moment here. Andy Dibble writes weird theology and other speculative fiction for Madison, Wisconsin, and works as a healthcare IT consultant. He completed his Master's of Theological Studies at Harvard Divinity School. His A Word That Means Everything, about Bible translation into alien languages, won first place in L. Ron Hubbard's Writers of the Future contest. His work also appears in Space and Time, Sci-Fi Journal, Starline, and others. Strange Religion, the anthology of sci-fi fantasy stories about religion that he's editing, is planned to be out later this month. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Andy to read his flash piece for the evening.
I'm going to read my story, The Greatest Good to God. It's a story I sold to Sci-Fi Journal a while ago. How much is the suffering of an insect worth, writhing on the ground, flapping one wing, the other plucked by a child? It's not the cruel pleasure of a child worth incomparably more. Kill 1,000 insects, 10,000. Their assembled suffering is as nothing. And why do we say this? Because an insect has the little capacity to suffer, let alone experience joy. As different as the insect and the child are, so is the child to me. The gulf yawns wider, in fact. Think of yourself as a snaky bacterium. Do you consider how many innocent streptococci you slaughter when you bleach your toilet seat? Should you? Of course not. They feel essentially nothing. I know. I'm God. I know the degree to which you, every one of you, suffers. But my suffering and joy is more, stupendously more. For all your imagination and amphetamines, you cannot begin to understand the barest perturbation in my well-being. For all my skill as teacher, I cannot begin to teach you. So whose welfare should I attend to? Mine or yours? Mine, of course. However sovereign I am, outside me is this moral law, the greatest happiness to the greatest number, utilitarianism. But my duty is not to better the condition of many, recall the cruel child. She owes the insect nothing, or near enough. Utilitarianism really amounts to a simpler formula. Create all the happiness you are able to create, and that is served by serving myself. Even the seraphim are like fireflies next to my sun. And what are you, clay of Adam, alongside them? Beneath me are the myriad choirs of angels, the denizens of the pyre abodes, the unseen shapes, the yellow emperors, the apsaras and asuras, and only then humanity. Even I must prioritize. Remember your place, snarky bacterium. Only my pity for lower existence gives me pause. Pity loves fairness. But if fairness is the rule, the lowliest, the most numerous should prosper. Abandon sanitation so that vermin and insects swarm. Shall I really make higher existence worse off for their sake? But I do not pity the cockroach like I pity the grieving mother, the orphan, or victim of calamity. So, on occasion, I intervene, not for their sake, but to squash pity. Now, pity is a greedy master. Give it a little, and the word on spirals of remorse. Why can't I do more? I know why, because I am yoked to utilitarianism. I must serve me. So normally, I distract myself, dazzle the Hebrews as a pillar of fire, march them on righteous conquest, incarnate and wreak havoc in their holy city, bask in their worship. You think it petty, but it works fast. Sometimes humanity creates something worthwhile, a certain 17 syllables penned by Basho and then translated into Russian, the curve of a Buddha statue's lip carelessly destroyed by the Huns, Paganini's grammar misquoted by Patanjali, Beethoven's 10th Symphony, the Argentine that lived the 20th century and never once experienced hate. But what is Starry Night alongside the splendor of exploding universes too violet for life? My majesty contains these might have beens. They astound me more than any triumph on a pale blue dot. My first attempt was Saji Michael. He was lofty enough that I could help him for his own sake, not just for mine. That he only wanted to serve me, be my silver sword, my strong right arm. Serving his interest was only a roundabout way of serving mine. So I tried again with Lucifer. He loved me, but only because he saw himself in me. His vanity was luminous, consuming, a million billion suns with a sucking hole inside. Like a supermassive galaxy, his self-love warped reality. But he was still a prima donna. He thought himself entitled to more of my attention than the utilitarian calculus allowed. So I sighed and saw him off. I created, I tried again. Creation is an experiment. Maybe evolution across all the teeming universe will rear people whose welfare means more than my own. If it could rear gods, a race near enough to me, there would be others I could help for their own sake. I watch evolution tinker. I nudge it along. The giraffe stands without passing out. The human eye sees a million colors. The rabbit eats its own poo to thrive. None are almost gods, but all have my image, my genius, and my wit. I became human to broaden my horizons, for I had never experienced relief. How could I? From the stance of eternity, I know when ill will turn out well. I do not know forgetfulness or gratitude or need. As I am, I know the warmth of a body only exteriorly. So I can imagine what it is like to be a man. I do not know what it is like for a man to be a man. So I became man. So now you understand how all worldly suffering is justified, how it is necessary. That tough nut theodicy in midst of a solution. In me, nearly everything has its end and goal, and that goal is my greater glory and pleasure. But of all possible worlds, every conceivable sequence of events, I chose this very one to serve the utilitarian law. I chose this creation and you in it. In some way, you, even your failed marriage, your stillborn child, your self-serving prayers, and your spotty church attendance, increase my happiness more than any of the panoply of merely possible people I could have thrown into existence. Be gladdened by this.
Thank you. That was Andy Dibble with The Greatest Good to God. Before that, you heard S.C. Attwell with Attempted Contact. And before that, a story of mine, An Open Letter to the people watching back home. Thank you all so much for joining us for this very brief Flash Science Fiction Night. There are links to everybody's respective books in the chat, as well as a link to our next Flash Science Fiction Night, which is coming up on May 24th. And we'll be doing these all through the summer. Thank you so much for joining us at Space Cowboy Books. Thank you to our readers, and thank you to our audience. We hope to see you next time.